Hey, Todd Martin here. Welcome back to part 2 of my pose method running analysis. In this video, I'm going to look at the difference between falling from support and pushing from support. I'm also going to look at the difference between pushing and jumping, or what pose instructors might refer to as unweighting. I'm also going to discuss the extensor paradox and triple extension and why these issues cause unnecessary confusion and potential misinterpretation of running mechanics. What's the difference between falling and pushing? Now let me talk about the different phases of running and what our body is doing and how does this relate to pose method. Well, first of all, we have the lean. The lean forward from pose is supposedly in pose method just a fall. But in fact, it is not a fall, it is a push. Beginning from this position, which is the pose, I am flexing my right hip and I have energy from my waist on the left, rotating forward from my upper core, tucking from my lower core on the left, and the active hip is the right one. This is the pose. When I begin to fall forward, what I'm doing is changing this position with a flexing right hip to a push, which is the same core waist position, but an extending left hip. That is push. That is different than falling forward, which is doing that. That's a fall forward, which causes the center of gravity to just drop to the ground as if you had a stick that was falling under the influence of gravity. Push is one of the 8 fundamental energies in Tai Chi. Push uses the following core actions: extension of the active hip, upper waist rotation turning away from the active hip, lower waist rotation turning toward the active hip. The contribution of waist rotation is consistently ignored in most analysis of body mechanics, but the waist is a key driver and director of all movements. When we ignore the contribution of the waist, we cannot understand the actions of the legs or hips. These are fundamental principles of Tai Chi. Usain Bolt's push starts here. He accelerates the leg toward the ground much faster than gravity, which is why the body does not have any time to drop. The force being generated is coming from the core. The force being generated by the push down of the leg is far greater than would be seen if it was only coming down under the force of gravity. This is the end of the push and the start of the next core movement phase, which is the pulse. The pulse will result in the unweighting. The push will not by itself lead to unweighting. In this clip, we see an alternate running style by Eliud Kipchoge, where he's landing with a midfoot strike and not generating the push until after passing through the pose position, where the foot is already on the ground. The push is what takes us forward from the pose. It moves the body forward from support without the loss of height that comes from falling. The push precedes the hop, which is required to leave the ground. The hop is what I referred to earlier as the pulse. Let's explore the push in detail. Hopping, if we're doing support and then switching and hopping in between, this is a vertical hop. And then when we are running, we can do a lean and a hop and change support in that manner. But in either case, we have to hop, which means elevating our center of mass off the ground so we are no longer under any support. That is when we can switch legs from one to the other. This is a complex muscular action to understand, and I'll show you exactly why using the Martin movement method. Hopping is going to be a combination of 2 different core movements. In the Martin movement method, I describe 8 fundamental patterns of core movement that are correlated with also knee and ankle movement that produce all of our various energies that we do when we're standing on 2 feet. These 8 energies come from the 8 fundamental energies of Tai Chi. And you can link to some videos below in the description section to see a full detailed description of those energies. It's too much for this video. But we have 2 of these energies involved in hopping. The first is going to be push. The second is going to be pulse. Let me demonstrate what a push is from the side position so you can see what I'm doing. Push is extension of our active hip and rotating the upper part of the core away from that active hip and the lower part of the core, or our lower abs, toward the active hip. And you can just practice this for yourself. With your right leg back, push yourself forward so your right arm and palm push forward like this. This is, in Tai Chi sense, a push. I am actively extending from my glutes on the right. My lower abs are rotating back, which creates a force pushing off of my hip extensors, which are pushing off of the ground. So I have 2 components of core force pushing off of the ground, making me move forward. I have hip extension and I have lower abs, which are rotating the pelvis back in the same direction, pushing off of the hip, which is pushing off the ground. My third element of the core is going to be the upper part of the waist, which is rotating away from the energy of my lower abs and my hip and the ground. So my upper abs are turning this way. This is a push with 3 components of the core. When we do a push, we are always going to end up with the similar action in our knee and ankle, regardless of what position we begin this push in. I call those peripheral joint actions from our knee and our ankle that allow us to maintain vertical posture when we execute a movement from the 3 elements of our core. When we do a push, we're always going to see the knee on the opposite side from the extending hip flex. And this is why we can shift forward so easily with vertical posture. We have a natural and reflexive flexion of our opposite leg knee. If I push without flexing the knee, I'm going to end up taking myself off of this vertical position. So only by flexing the knee can I keep that vertical posture as I push. And this is somewhat reflexive, or it's just based on our intention. If I intend to stay vertical, my knee will flex without thinking about it. If I force the knee to not flex, that's when I'm going to end up destabilizing my vertical posture. That's kind of a complex way of saying you don't have to think about your knees or your ankles when you're moving from your center, as long as you are focusing on keeping yourself vertical. The other thing that we're going to see with push with the ankles is going to be plantar flexion of our ankle on the side of the extending hip. So as I push forward, you're going to notice plantar flexion of your ankle on the right leg. So my toes are going to be pushing down into the ground as I do this. There's many examples of push that we use all the time. When we're doing kickboxing, when you throw a cross, you're using push. Extension, you can see the plantar flexion of the ankle, and then flexion of my knee on the opposite side when I throw a cross. When we step down from a stair, we're also going to see the same action. When we step down, we're using push on the side of the swing leg, which is going to reach in a way down towards the lower step, and the knee on the opposite side, which is what's standing on the upper stair, is going to automatically flex. You'll also notice when this is done properly that the ankle is going to be plantar flexed on the side of the leg that is going down, causing us to place on the ball. We're also going to see the same thing if you're riding a bike and pushing down. You're going to push down with one leg, the other knee is going to flex, and it's going to come up at the same time that we're pushing down. This is what we're seeing in the pose method when we're switching legs.
I believe the pull of the rear foot up, as described in the pose method, is not triggered by active pulling, it's triggered by the active push. I agree with Dr. Romanoff that these movements are ingrained in our nervous system and designed to allow us to interact with gravity, keeping our body with vertical posture. But there is an action required. This muscular action is coming from the core, including the waist and the hips. That's where the intentional force is generated. The knee and the ankle movements are reflexive responses to the pattern of core movement. This may explain the lack of EMG firing during the propulsive phase during running, referred to as the extensor paradox. Because there is no knee extension during push, we do not have the triple extension of the hip, knee, and ankle during the push from support. Triple extension will not occur until that very brief period in the next phase, which I referred to as pulse. This is another movement triggered by the core. We will look at pulse in part 3 of this series. I'll see you there.